It's time for your Low Country Real Estate Market Update. It's the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show. Brian is one of the top 1% real estate agents in Charleston. Find him online at listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or call him at 843-345-1273. Now, broadcasting from the WTMA studios, here's your host, Brian Beatty.
Good morning, Charleston, and welcome to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show Halloween edition. So today we're going to talk about horror stories in real estate, things that go wrong throughout the course of a transaction, what you can do to avoid some of these things, and share just a lot of interesting experiences along the way. You know, as a real estate agent, you walk into people's homes on a daily basis, and sometimes you get surprised. Even now, I can still be surprised after 15 years in this business and over 1,000, transactions, over $500 million in real estate sold, and you just never know what you're going to walk into sometimes. And so I'm going to share some of these stories with you. Share some things that you guys need to know, things you need to avoid. And these are, kind of the worst of the worst, quite frankly. But let's be honest. Real estate is a challenging process in and of itself because there's a lot of emotion involved, right? You've got a lot of things going on, a lot of moving parts. It's an emotional process for people. And very rarely do things go perfectly according to plan. When they do, it's amazing, it's awesome, it's fantastic. But let's be real. Real estate it can be a tricky process. And so the agents that are truly experienced are the ones that can navigate you through that process, problem solve along the way based on prior experience, and have you come out of the other side of it being the winning party in the transaction. That's really the goal here, is to help you become more informed through this radio show, and then to know the questions to ask when you hire an agent, know what the process looks like, have realistic expectations about the market so that you can win in your transaction. And so the first thing I want to talk about is a scam that's costing people over $1 billion a year. And this is wire fraud, mortgage wire fraud. So it's a scam in which a hacker poses as your real estate agent and then convinces you to divert your closing costs to a fraudulent account. So mortgage wire fraud essentially relies on a complicated hacking technique called phishing. And in a phishing scam, a hacker uses a fake email or fake phone number or fake website or whatever to impersonate somebody that you trust. So a scammer who runs a mortgage wire fraud kind of business might use an email address or a phone number that looks like one your real estate agent or lender uses, or even closing attorney. And so these emails and the texts, they can look authentic. I mean, they really do look real, and they can even contain some personal information that only somebody you know would have. And so, of course, this scammer, fishes your personal information out of your agent's inbox beforehand. And so scammers, they can also use a technique called spoofing to make themselves more legitimate, where spoofing is essentially when a scammer uses a special software to mimic your agent or lender's phone number or email address. So when a scammer calls you or emails you from a spoofed account, it can look exactly like someone that you've already been talking to. So obviously the goal of a mortgage wire fraud company is to get your closing costs into an account that the scammer owns. So the scammer might tell you that, hey, there was a last minute change in their banking procedures, and hey, something might have went wrong. Hey, that email that you received with wiring instructions was actually incorrect. Use this one. And the truth, of course, is that the address the scammer gives you is their own. It's going to go straight into their pocket, right? And so once you initiate that wire transfer, it's really, really hard for you to get your money back. In most instances, you do not get your money back. So, I mean, this can leave you thousands, tens of thousands of dollars in debt, delay your closing, maybe even prevent you from buying a house. And it's easy to assume that you'll never fall for a scam, but unfortunately, this stuff is on the rise. Between 2015 and 2017, it rose over 1,100%, and starting in 2017, it started accounting for over $1 billion a year in losses in the form of real estate transaction costs that went to scammers. So how does this work? And so, let's just kind of go through kind of the common practice here. So let's say you're buying a house and you're finally ready to close. And so you finalize all your closing details, you know exactly how much you owe at closing. And then suddenly you get an email from what would either be your real estate agent or maybe the lender or the closing attorney. It has their signature, it has their address on it, they address you by name. And they essentially tell you that, hey, there's an error in your closing and that you're no longer bringing a check to closing. You have to wire your money, or that the wiring instructions they previously sent were just incorrect, and they urge you to do this really quickly to avoid delays in your closing. They say, hey, and they'll use some scare tactics like, hey, if you don't do this right now, there's a chance that this loan won't fund and that your contract will be in default and that you could lose your earnest money and ultimately the house. So they scare you into a panic so that you immediately send over the money. And it's obviously a few days before closing in most instances. Sometimes we have closings where, look, things do happen last minute. Closing attorneys are incredibly busy. Lenders are busy. Appraisers are busy. The whole process is just jammed up right now. Underwriters are overworked and underpaid. A lot going on in the real estate world right now as it relates to just transactions and delays in transactions. And so it's, in this scenario, it's a pretty common method of operation for these scammers involved in mortgage wire fraud. They email from an address that seems legitimate. Their email seems to be convincing. They may even put in like the agent's picture and their contact information that they take from the agent's email address. It's bad. And a lot of people fall for it. Like I said, over $1 billion a year over the past 3 years, past 4 actually, have been lost to mortgage wire fraud. So first step here, and here are the things that you need to know. First of all, you need to know the closing process. You need to be in direct communication over the phone with your real estate agent, with the lender, with the closing attorney. Never assume anything when it comes to sending somebody money, whether it's a real estate transaction or anything else. Have correct contact information. Be aware of last-minute closing changes by asking those questions. Hey, is this true? Call to confirm wiring instructions. That's incredibly important. And just, obviously best practice here is just never email your financial information, because if somebody gets into your account and they find that information, social security numbers, credit card information, banking information, it can be bad news for you. So that's the first one that I wanted to start off with is, this wire fraud scam. In fact, there's an addendum that we have in our contracts now that requires your real estate agent to explain to you what wire fraud is, and to be really involved with you, of course, at the tail end of the transaction when it comes time for you to send money when you're buying a house, so that this doesn't happen to you. So obviously, if it does happen, you need to contact your bank or your wire transfer company immediately, and then you can file a complaint with the FBI. You can get them involved. But first one here is just don't fall for wire fraud. Be aware of the scam. That's the first step. And then verify. Only talk to the people that are involved in the transaction. If you're talking to somebody a few days before closing that you've never talked to before, you need to talk to the person that you've been in contact with, the closing attorney. Call their office, call that closing attorney's cell number, call your agent, and just make sure that everything is on the up and up. And I've got a lot of these kinds of stories today. So I'm going to start off with that one. And when I come back, we're going to talk about things like really bad appraisals on property. We're going to talk about rental scams. We're going to talk about selling for sale by owner and some of the things that people can do to you and really take advantage of the situation. We're going to talk about, inspections, some language in repairs, hiring contractors, hard money, rentals. All these types of things we're going to talk about here over the course of the next hour. But if you want to, talk with a quality real estate agent, again, I've been in the business for 15 years, over 1,000 transactions, over $500 million in real estate sold. We'd love to earn your business, so feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to talk privately about your interest in buying, selling, or investing in real estate. My number is 843-400-8009. That's 400-8009. Oh, of course, you can visit us online at listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Stick around, folks, for the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show Halloween special right here on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA and WTMA.com.
It's the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show. Broadcast Saturday mornings at 9 and Sunday mornings at 10 on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA.
1250 WTMA.
Now, the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show continues on Charleston's Big Talker, 1250 WTMA.
Welcome back, Charleston, to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show Halloween Special. So today we're talking about horror stories in real estate. We just talked about wire fraud as a scam that's costing people over $1 billion a year nationwide. So if you're just joining us, you can catch every episode of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on our website, listingsincharleston.com. We're also on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. You can find our podcast basically anywhere. But listingsincharleston.com is our website, so you can also learn more about my real estate team and who we are and what we do and what we sell, how we sell it. Look at some testimonials, find out how much your home is worth, and then look at some of our incentives that we offer for folks that reach out to us that want to hire us to help them buy, sell, or invest in real estate. So listingsincharleston.com is the website. And, of course, you can always call or text me. My number is 843-400-8009, 843-400-8009. So I'm going to bounce around. I'm going to talk with you guys about some of these stories and things that we experience. And this is probably my favorite show of the year, truth be told, just because there really are things that happen in real estate that agents just don't like to talk about. Everybody likes you to think that any home that they touch sells in a matter of days for 100% of asking price. They find some success stories along the way, and then they essentially use that to promote themselves as being the status quo. That's the expectation. And then, of course, you've got folks when helping to purchase a home that will, brag about being able to get it for a certain amount off of the asking price and so on and so forth, and leads you to believe that that's commonplace as well. Hey, I just helped this guy get a home for 20% off of the asking price. Well, could be that house was 20% overpriced, so you didn't really gain any ground there. But the point here is that there are all these things that happen in real estate that make for a better real estate agent. It's one of my favorite sayings is that a smooth sea never made for a skillful mariner. So when you hire a real estate agent, look for the person that's had enough experience to be able to get their client through tough times. And you never think it's going to be you would never think that you'd be the person that's going to have a tough time selling your house. We've had situations this year where, homes are selling in a matter of days in particular areas, and we'll have the listing, and then 2 weeks will go by, and then a month will go by, and then 6 weeks will go by. And everybody's hands are up in the air saying, well, hey, what in the world's going on? Why hasn't this sold yet? And the reality is, the truth of the matter is that the average days on market in Charleston is still about 6 weeks. Yes, we have record low inventory. We have record high demand. Well, I wouldn't say record high demand, but we have extremely high demand, which is what's putting up prices. And so now everybody is hearing these stories from their friends and from real estate agents and things that they see on Facebook or that they hear on the radio. And yes, I realize the irony in that. But everybody's kind of the expectation that, hey, when you put a property in the market, it's sold in a matter of days and you get multiple offers. And yeah, oftentimes that's true, but it's all part of the strategy. When you sit down with your listing agent, you talk through what you hope to accomplish. There should be a tried and true method for accomplishing that goal. And that's a conversation that needs to be had, and that you as the seller, you need to trust your gut and you need to verify that what that agent's telling you is something that can actually produce results. So let's use a few examples here. I had an agent on my team that had a property under contract. It's an investment property for one of his investors. They're buying a property to renovate, flip. And when they got the appraisal, they're getting private money, like most investors do, right? They don't go to traditional banks. They find somebody that can be their private money lender, that they either, they pay a percentage at closing, and then they pay them monthly payments. Sometimes investors will just cut in the person financing the deal at a percentage. There's a few different ways to slice that cake. But in this instance, the borrower who was getting private money agreed to just pay some money up front, both to the person providing the loan and then in the form of a down payment so that they were invested in the deal. Obviously, after the first month, payments would begin, and it requires an appraisal. So the appraisal comes in. The appraisal is $250,000 lower than the contract amount, which in this scenario was about 40% below fair market value. And so when you do an appraisal like this, we're also looking at, well, hey, what's it worth once all the renovations have been completed? What's the profit here? We know the purchase price. We know the closing costs and all the finance charges associated with the purchase. How much is it going to cost to renovate it? And when it's all said and done, is there enough profit for the private money lender to say, yes, I feel comfortable giving you that amount of money because I know there's enough profit there to where it's going to be really tough for me to lose my investment. My investment meaning the loan, the amount that lender is providing to that contractor, to that investor. So this appraisal comes in. It's $250,000 below where it should be. It's wrong on so many levels. They're using neighborhoods that are not comparable. They're using properties in neighborhoods that are significantly smaller, not clearly or not even close to being as nice. There's just stuff all over the place on this appraisal, and I see them every once in a while where it's like, how in the world does this person have the ability to do appraisals for a living? And so I sit down with my agent and we start picking this thing apart. We're saying, well, that's not a comp. That's not a comp. This is a better comp. We're looking at the individual adjustments that the appraiser is making for the comparables that they chose. And the adjustments are way off. They don't make sense. They're not uniform throughout the appraisal. And this is, I have a lot of experience in doing this, especially over the past few years, because prices have been going up significantly. I mean, there are plenty of areas in Charleston where we're seeing a 10% increase in pricing just this year. Who would have thought that, by the way? And so, yes, appraisers are having a tough time keeping up. In many instances, buyers are willing to pay more than, frankly, the average sales price of the comparable homes that sold 6 months ago. Because if you really think about it, in a market where prices are going up, when the property hits the market, that agent and that seller are looking at sales from the previous 6 months. Sometimes they have to go back a year in areas where there just aren't a lot of sales, but typically speaking, they're looking at things that have sold over the past 6 months. Well, in some areas, there could have been several percentage points that would have needed to be applied in the form of appreciation to a house if, let's say, it closed in May and we're looking at comps for a property that's going to list in November. But here's where it gets even more complicated, or just things that agents need to be aware of. And this, I'm going to talk about this for just a second, and I'll move on to some more horror stories. But it's important when it comes to pricing properties, because I see people missing the mark on pricing, and that's just natural. That just naturally happens when there are essentially 2 real estate agents for every property available for sale. We've got about a little over 3,000 homes available for sale and 7,000 agents in our market. So it's easy to understand and wrap your head around the fact that because inventory is so low and because listing opportunities are so hard to come by for a lot of agents, that when they get that opportunity to represent a seller, which is a lead source for them because people call on the sign, maybe they, inquire online, and even if that home doesn't sell, well, hopefully they can sell a buyer that inquired on that property something else. So when somebody gets a listing, they leverage that, and they should, quite frankly, because that's a function of marketing, and you want everybody contacting you about that property, and that's a good thing, but not when the agent knows that there's frankly just no chance of the house selling at that price, and they're not being forthcoming with you about it. And so, back to this example of this appraisal that came in way low, we contested it, and the appraiser rose the appraised value by $200,000. About, 30-something%. That's a significant amount of money. Had we not known how to do that, had we not been able to justify our price and know about the appraisal process, then our client would have more than likely lost that deal, which, by the way, is on the market now after a beautiful renovation, and he's going to make a lot of money on that deal. But we almost didn't get it because we couldn't finance it, and the seller wasn't going to wait around for some investor to try and figure out alternative financing, which is that's a big deal for a lot of investors. It's hard to find the deals right now, and when you do find them, you have to be the type of investor that can close no matter what. There shouldn't be any hiccups to you being able to deliver on your promise of a smooth closing, which is what a lot of sellers want when they sell to an investor. They don't want the headache. They don't want to bicker over repairs. They realize they're taking a bit of a haircut on the deal, but they just want out. They want their money, and they want it easily. And so these appraisals that we're seeing sometimes, yes, they need to be adjusted. There is information either missing from the appraisal or inaccurate in the appraisal, and that's why you folks that have good reputations in town are going to have better success at contesting these appraisals rather than kind of getting that typical hot-headed real estate agent that's going to just put everybody on blast and start name calling, start shouting. It's really counterproductive, and frankly, those people are a pain in the you-know-what to work with. Nobody likes working with a person like that. So we take them through this process of how to contest the appraisal. And I'll tell you, I had another deal where that first deal actually fell through because the appraiser, even after all of the information that I submitted, I set a 2-page, single-spaced document saying, these are all the things that I see in this appraisal. These are comps that weren't used that are more comparable. These adjustments don't seem to be in line. There's no consistency in the amount that you're giving for adjustments. You haven't adjusted for lot size, which is a big deal. All these things. And the appraiser increased the appraisal amount by $10,000, which was still not even close. The entire appraisal was a joke. And so after we tried to contest it and that failed, then you can move to have that appraisal get rejected. You can try and throw it out and prove to essentially the lender that, hey, this appraiser is, they're just not familiar with pricing and value in this area. We've got a contract for, $30,000 more than the increased appraisal. But ultimately, the lender decided not to reject the appraisal, and we had to sell it to somebody else. And we did, and we got the job done, but it was a frustration that the seller shouldn't have to deal with, and frankly, the buyer really wanted the house, but they couldn't afford to pay the difference between the increased appraisal amount and the contract amount. It was like $30-something thousand, which when that happens, by the way, the buyer has to come to the table with cash because they're only going to base your loan and your down payment off of the appraisal amount. So any difference between the appraisal amount and the contract amount has to be made up in the form of cash from the buyer. And that's why you see appraisal contingencies on contracts. Because if a buyer does not have that and an appraisal comes in low, they don't have the cash to be able to bridge the gap, then they're in default of contract. Now, when an appraisal comes in low, the seller doesn't have to accept that lower amount, just like the buyer doesn't have to pay the contract amount. It's a new point of negotiation. But we're seeing it more and more, and that's just a function of prices going up really across the board in Charleston and data lacking. The data that they use for those appraisers, you have to assign appreciation to those numbers. If something sold 6 months ago, it was under contract 2 months prior to that, which is what they based the offer amount on. And at the time that they made the offer, they were looking at comparable sales 6 months prior to that. So if you're tracking here, what I'm saying is that when somebody is trying to determine fair market value right now for a house, and they look at something that sold 6 months ago, which was under contract 2 months before that, that data is already 8 months old. But at the point in time that they made the offer 8 months ago, they were looking at homes that had sold 6 months ago. So now we're looking at data that's 12 to 14 months old. And you can't use what happened last year and apply it to a home this year. You have to assign appreciation. And if you don't know what's happening in the market and you don't have, the experience to understand what people are willing to pay and how to justify value, then a lot of people are getting caught between a rock and a hard place. So if you're thinking about selling, the first thing, look at all the homes that are not available for sale right now. When we go on listing appointments, we're looking at things that are on the market, under contract, and that have sold in the past 6 months. In most instances, there's like 1 or 2 other homes available for sale. So there's an incredible opportunity for sellers right now, even this time of year, because inventory is so low, to really be the seller that kind of sets the bar for pricing. So if that's something you want to talk more about with an experienced real estate agent, I'd love the opportunity to do that. Feel free to reach out to me at 843-400-8009. That's 843-400-8009, or go online and submit your contact info through there, or just learn more about our team. Listingsincharleston.com is the website. Listingsincharleston.com. Stick around, folks, for more of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show Halloween edition right here on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA and WTMA.com.
Visit Brian Beatty's website at listingsincharleston.com. The Brian Beatty Real Estate Show continues next on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA. 1250 WTMA. Expert news and views on the Low Country real estate scene. The Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on 1250 WTMA.
Welcome back to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show Halloween edition. So I want to lighten the mood a little bit. I want to tell you a story that's, it's not necessarily funny. It's kind of funny, but I was talking with another agent, and so this is not my story, full disclosure here, but an agent on someone else's real estate team, this is their first deal. They're showing a buyer a house, and he's never sold a home before, but a buyer walks into the property with their agent, and they are met by the seller of the home. And really, sellers are not supposed to be at showings for a variety of reasons. I'm not going to get into that. But anyways, the seller is there at the door. Handgun on his hip, which made the buyer nervous, made the agent a little nervous. And it's just uncomfortable in the first place. But then the seller goes on to say, I'm going to be in the garage during your showing. Do not come into the garage. I'm avoiding an arrest warrant, and I will be armed. And so the agent and the buyer are like, okay. So they walk through this house, and of course, the buyer loves it, and they want to make an offer. So they make an offer, they get it under contract, they start going through the process, and here we are a few days before closing, and the buyer does a final walkthrough. You do a final walkthrough to make sure that, nothing has happened to the house right before you buy it. God forbid a tree fell on the roof, or the seller hasn't moved out all of their stuff, or maybe they took the washer and dryer, but they were supposed to leave it in the house. All these things have happened again and again and again. But in this particular instance, in this story, they go to the property. Everything in the house is cleared out. Everything looks good. And so, hey, I get to go and see the garage for the first time. So they open the door to the garage. Can't get in. It's not locked, it's barricaded. It'll open about an inch, and then it hits furniture or whatever else was behind the door. And then the seller yells and says, I'm armed. Do not attempt to enter the garage or I'll shoot. And so here we are. This buyer's trying to buy this house. Everything has been arranged. The moving truck is on the way. They've already left the other house that they were living in. And this seller was so paranoid that he was going to be arrested that the agent, the listing agent, the person representing the seller, had to personally go over there and pack up the seller's garage, put it into a moving truck that he had to pay for, and move the seller out. By the way, all of which was done at gunpoint. The seller was so crazy, so adamant that someone was out to get him, that he held a gun on his own agent the entire time. And the buyers didn't see the garage until like an hour before closing, and everything was fine in it. But, I love selling real estate. I just don't know if I love it enough to be held at gunpoint to pack up someone's garage. I think that's going to be a no for me. I don't think that that one deal is worth that potential consequence. But, hey, that's just me. I'll go above and beyond, don't get me wrong. But I don't think my wife or kids would appreciate me being held at gunpoint. I think there was probably a different way of handling that, and it's called 911, but that's just me. So anyways, just trying to lighten the load a little bit here, but there are some other things that I want to talk through and some situations that have occurred really over the past year or so that I think you guys need to be aware of. These are all things that are situational. These are things that come up from time to time that should be learning experiences from agents. Sometimes these agents keep making the same mistakes. Ultimately, a lot of these folks get out of the business. But I'll tell you, there was a house that we sold this year, and I won't give specifics necessarily as to where or how much and so on and so forth and who the other people were, but this house was previously on the market with another real estate agent. And it went under contract after a few months, and it seemed to be a good deal. And it came time for the home inspection. Home inspection found some things, specifically some termite damage, old termite damage, underneath the house. We see this all the time. We also see high moisture readings because we just live in a very humid environment. And so, and obviously, termites like to live there. So does mold. So anyways, the inspection occurs, a repair request is generated as a result of it. And this is something that I'm really passionate about, is the way in which contracts are written, because this is where, if agents are not experienced, it can really have a negative impact on their clients. So the repair request from the buyer said that all repairs were to be done by a licensed contractor to the buyer's satisfaction. And so the problem with to the buyer's satisfaction is that there really is no definition of that other than the buyer has to give their stamp of approval. So what do you think happened? They go, they make the repairs, the buyer looks at it and they say, I'm not satisfied with the repairs. Nothing's wrong. It's been signed off on by a contractor. Everything has been done above board. It was all legit. But the buyer, because they had that ambiguous language in their contract, was able to cancel that deal because, as the seller found out later, they found another house down the street and they went and they bought that one. Even though the seller made the repairs in accordance with the repair addendum, because of that ambiguous language, quote unquote, satisfied with repairs, buyer has to be satisfied with the results of the repairs. The buyer was able to get out of the deal, and there's really nothing that the seller could do about it. So I see, we've had a few versions of our real estate contract over the years to try and address this very issue, which is ambiguous language in contracts. There needs to be very clear expectations about what happens when a buyer and a seller agree on something like repairs. And so there's a specific addendum that's supposed to be used, and the language is just incredibly important. And in this particular example, the seller had made the repairs, and they'd already packed up and they'd moved. I mean, all their stuff was out. And this is not a small home. This is about, I think, a 4,000 square foot home that we sold. So that agent got fired. We got hired. We took them through the process. We got it sold. Everything was fine. But I see this happen, unfortunately, quite a bit, where people are not being coached through the process from the time that a contract is signed. For a lot of sellers, they think, hey, the contract's signed, so long as this inspection turns out okay, then this is pretty much a done deal. And that's really not the case. So you really need to be careful about when you decide to make the decision, or when you make the decision to start packing up your things and moving. In my opinion, I'm not going to give the green light for you to start putting a down payment on a new place, or maybe you're moving somewhere to go rent for a few months before you buy in a new state. I don't want you packing up your stuff and then committing to a place to live if I can't give you reasonable assurance that this deal is going to close. And contracts have several contingencies baked into them. We have to get through those things before you start making major moving decisions and plans and investment. And so there's just another example of the agent that you hire, in my opinion, has to be experienced. You think about all the for sale by owners that are out there that are representing themselves in the course of a transaction that haven't seen these types of issues before. They haven't been exposed to them. You can apply common sense and you can use the help of the closing attorney, but if you don't have a real estate agent that's been through this before, it can be a really challenging and frankly really heartbreaking and costly endeavor for you, when the aim, of course, was to save money. And so when we come back, we're going to talk about a few things that happen when you sell your home for sale by owner, maybe throw in a few more quick stories. All that and more as the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show Halloween edition continues right here on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA and WTMA.com. And remember, if you want to reach out to me to talk about your real estate needs, whether it's something you want to do here in the next few months or it's something that you're planning on doing summer, fall of next year, we'd love the opportunity to have the conversation and just walk through the process with you. My number is 843-400-8009. That's 843-400-8009. Or visit us online at listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com.
Hear the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show every Saturday morning at 9 and each Sunday morning at 10 on 1250 WTMA and WTMA.com.
1250 WTMA.
Now, here's more of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show on the Big Talker, 1250 WTMA.
Welcome back, folks, to the last few minutes of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show Halloween edition. So this entire show, we've been talking about horror stories in real estate, things that can go wrong, things that you need to know, kind of the ugly side of real estate. But I've always been passionate about kind of peeling back the curtain on our industry, helping you understand what happens behind the scenes. What are agents actually doing? What are they not doing? What do you need to know about the market and the process so that you're an informed consumer when it comes time for you to buy, sell, or invest in real estate? You know the right questions to ask, you know how to hire the right agent, and you know how to hold them accountable to the goals and the process and the promises that they make you in order to help you with your real estate transaction. And so I want to finish with for sale by owners, because this is something we're seeing more and more of this year, right? It's a really hot seller's market, and so for a lot of folks, it makes sense for them to try and sell their home on their own and save some commission. And that's all well and good. And we work with a lot of them. We bring them buyers. We've got a for sale by owner incentive program that allows us to do, frankly, a few different things. We can market the property, and obviously you can hire us as a full service real estate agent. If you bring the buyer of your own marketing, you don't have to pay us anything. You can cancel the agreement, or you can keep us on and help you negotiate for 1%. There's a bunch of different ways of helping somebody sell their home on their own. And we find that when we're genuinely helpful in the process with a for sale by owner, then we ultimately help them buy a home after they've sold the home on their own, because their goal, of course, is to save some commission. And I'm here to tell you, in this market, you can do it. You can do it in any market, frankly. You just have to be really careful. And so, you know, I don't want to get into the doom and gloom of the really kind of scary side of selling for sale by owner, because yes, you're inviting people into your home that you don't know. So obviously there's the safety aspect of it. Make sure that you're getting somebody's driver's license. I'll spare you the time and kind of the horror stories of all the folks that basically get either kidnapped or killed, or something has happened because they let somebody into their house, and people will stalk for sale by owners. It's a real thing. Educate yourself on that. Use common sense, be safe. But there's some things that, you know, if you think about who looks at for sale by owners, what for sale by owners are synonymous with getting a deal. Let's just first start there. Okay. Most people, when they look at a for sale by owner, think, hey, since they're saving a commission, I can get a better deal on this property. And if you think about it, real estate, frankly, is inflated by about 6%, because that's how much people pay in commission. And the vast majority of real estate transactions are done through the help of a real estate agent. So frankly, values are inflated 6% to account for the commissions that are baked into that pricing. And most buyers realize that. And so if you are trying to sell your home for the exact same amount as somebody else on your street, and the buyer realizes that you're actually selling your home for 6% more than anybody else because you're not paying a commission, well, then one of the first things they're going to do is they're going to knock off at least 6% off of the asking price, assuming you're trying to sell it for fair market value, because they know that you're making more. You have more wiggle room. So as a seller, really, you haven't accomplished anything. You haven't saved any money, which when we talk to for sale by owners, that is, 99 times out of 100, that's why they're selling on their own, to save money. And then you have all the challenges of the contract. And I told some stories earlier about language that people can insert into contracts that essentially give them a get-out-of-jail-free card. Anytime you see that somebody is to be satisfied with, fill in the blank, that you as a seller really have no recourse, because you can't control or dictate their satisfaction. But if you think about some of these scams that happen to for sale by owners, there was a story that came out a little earlier this year of somebody that saw a for sale by owner. They did some research. They realized that they had it on the market with a real estate agent for about 6 months. It didn't sell. The seller said, you know what? I'm going to just take matters into my own hands, and I'm going to sell the home on my own. And so an investor comes along and says, hey, and by the way, the house was vacant. The seller had already moved out. It's costing them money every day. And so an investor comes along and says, hey, how about this? I'll give you rent on this property, and I will increase that rent by 5% every year for the next 5 years. But here's where I want to start. And it was below fair market value rent, but it was guaranteed rental income, according to the seller. At least that's how it was presented by the investor. And the seller they didn't really have a great way of determining how much that property would rent for, so they took it. And then they realized that this person was not an investor, or not appearing as though he was an investor to the for sale by owner. He was just, hey, I want to rent your house for 5 years. Here's how much I'm willing to pay you. So then it turns out later on, the owner found out that the investor offered below market rent so that they could just turn around and rent the property to somebody at a higher amount and pocket the change. So they were essentially going in and lowballing for sale by owners, getting rental agreements signed, turning around and renting it to somebody for profit. And they had it was something crazy. It was like 200 plus homes that they were doing this on. And those sellers were stuck because they had signed a lease until they realized that a lot of these, they realized after having attorneys look at it that the lease allowed them to re-rent the property to sublet, and that there was no, the owner had no control over how much they charged another tenant to take over the lease that was signed between the property owner and the investor. And so that's just one example of things you need to be aware of. We see this all the time on our listings where somebody will create a fake rental listing on one of the homes that we have for sale. Craigslist is, I'll tell you, I like Craigslist for certain things, but for big purchases, for major life decisions, I would steer clear of Craigslist. There's just too much that goes on there. There are too many scams on Craigslist, at least for me. You obviously do what you want, but I'm here to tell you that probably once a week, we get a phone call from somebody asking about a property that we have for rent. And at least as of right now, we don't do property management. We'll be offering that soon, but all we do is help people buy, sell, and invest in real estate. We don't have rental properties. And so whenever somebody calls me about a property for rent, I automatically know it's a scam. And so I ask them, where did you see it? Craigslist. So all these people do is they take our data that all they do is just copy and paste the photos from our listing on Zillow or Realtor.com or wherever they see it. They create a fake rental posting. They usually have the rental amount be pretty significantly below fair market rent so that it looks like a great deal, too good to be true. And of course it always is. And they'll create some sort of sob story like, hey, I had to move overseas, or my wife and I are divorced and now we live in different parts of the country, but we still own this property and we're just trying to rent it because we can't sell it. Choose your sob story. But obviously what they're after here is your security deposit. Either that, or they will just continuously charge people rental application fees, saying, hey, fill out this rental application. It's $50. And all they're doing is just banking on rental applications. And some of these folks are making ridiculous amounts of money on these scams. So be incredibly careful about seeing, about these rental properties, especially on Craigslist. Research the address. Find a real estate agent to talk to, and I do this all the time for folks because I don't want anybody getting taken advantage of. And if you ever have questions about stuff like this, give me a call. I'm happy to help. Not just here to, tell you what's going on in the real estate world or help you buy, sell, invest in real estate. Just anything real estate related at all that you need help with, feel free to give me a call. 843-400-8009 is my cell. 843-400-8009. Or go to my website, listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. You guys have a great Halloween weekend, and thanks again for listening to the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show Halloween edition on the Big Talker 1250 WTMA and WTMA.com.
Happy Halloween!
Join us for another edition of the Brian Beatty Real Estate Show next Saturday morning at 9 and Sunday morning at 10. Contact Brian Beatty online at listingsincharleston.com. That's listingsincharleston.com. Or call him at 843-345-1273. 843-345-1273.